You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Containers have revolutionized how applications are packaged, deployed, and scaled. But with that innovation comes a distinct set of security challenges. Unlike traditional virtual machines, containers share the host kernel, making them lighter and faster, but also more reliant on the integrity of their underlying platform. Container platform security, therefore, involves more than just protecting individual containers. It encompasses orchestrator governance, node hardening, image integrity, and runtime controls. Orchestrators like Kubernetes or OpenShift provide the coordination and automation that make containers powerful, but they also introduce new attack surfaces through control planes and cluster management APIs. Ensuring that these environments are secure requires disciplined governance and strict adherence to least privilege principles. For learners, mastering container platform security is about appreciating both the speed and fragility of this ecosystem. The same mechanisms that make containers agile can, if left unsecured, become pathways for rapid compromise across entire environments. A container can be understood as a self-contained application package that includes all necessary dependencies while sharing the host kernel for efficiency. Instead of running full operating systems, containers use namespaces and control groups to provide isolation, creating the illusion that each container has its own environment. This approach makes them highly portable and lightweight compared to virtual machines, allowing organizations to deploy microservices rapidly and scale them elastically. However, because they rely on the same kernel, containers are only as secure as the host that runs them. If kernel vulnerabilities exist, isolation may be bypassed, exposing multiple workloads simultaneously. This makes hardening the host and limiting container privileges essential. By viewing containers as both efficient tools and potential shared risk environments, security professionals recognize why their design demands specialized controls that go beyond traditional workload defenses. A container orchestrator is the engine that turns containers from isolated units into cohesive applications. Orchestrators like Kubernetes manage scheduling, networking, storage, and scaling, ensuring that the desired state of the system matches its actual state. This automation provides resilience, but it also creates a critical control point. A compromised orchestrator could allow an attacker to deploy malicious containers, manipulate services, or disrupt workloads across the cluster. For this reason, orchestrators must be governed with strict access control, policy enforcement, and auditing. Their power lies in centralization, but so does their risk. Just as a conductor coordinates every instrument in an orchestra, the orchestrator synchronizes every container and resource. If the conductor is corrupted, the entire performance unravels. Understanding this dual nature helps learners appreciate why orchestrator governance is a pillar of container security. Control plane components are the brains of the container platform, managing the state of the cluster and coordinating workloads. These components, such as the Kubernetes API server, etcd database, and scheduler, hold the keys to cluster operations. Their compromise would allow full manipulation of workloads, secrets, and configurations. Protecting the control plane requires strict access control, including identity federation, role-based permissions, and enforced multi-factor authentication. Certificate hygiene is equally important, as certificates secure communication between nodes and services. Poorly managed or expired certificates can lead to outages or, worse, unauthorized access. Auditing every interaction with the control plane ensures accountability and provides forensic evidence if incidents occur. The control plane is a prime target because it offers systemic control, so hardening it is non-negotiable. A resilient container platform is built on a control plane that is both secure and verifiable. Worker nodes form the backbone of container platforms, running the actual workloads that serve business functions. These nodes must be hardened, much like traditional servers, but with added attention to their role in multi-tenant clusters. Operating systems should be minimal, with only the packages necessary to support containers. This reduces the attack surface and simplifies patch management. Timely updates are crucial, as unpatched kernels or container runtimes can enable escapes or privilege escalation. Hardened worker nodes enforce the principle that containers must rely on robust foundations, otherwise, their isolation is meaningless. Security teams must also monitor node activity, ensuring that workloads cannot tamper with the host. In practice, securing worker nodes means applying the same rigor as securing any other production system, but with the recognition that their compromise could ripple outward, affecting dozens or hundreds of running containers simultaneously. Container images represent the DNA of workloads, immutable artifacts that define how applications run. Because they are portable and reusable, images must be built from trusted bases and treated as sensitive code. Vulnerability scanning ensures that known flaws are identified before deployment, while provenance checks verify that images come from legitimate sources. Treating images as immutable enforces consistency. Once built, they should not be altered in the field. This immutability supports traceability and auditability, as administrators can always link a running container back to a specific version of an image. However, if images are compromised at their source, every container built from them inherits the same weaknesses. This makes secure image pipelines and continuous scanning essential practices. By thinking of images as building blocks, organizations understand that secure foundations yield resilient workloads, while unverified or outdated images become liabilities at scale. Image registries act as the distribution hubs for container artifacts, storing and serving images to developers and platforms. Their central role makes them attractive targets for attackers seeking to inject malicious images into pipelines. Securing registries requires enforcing authentication and authorization, ensuring that only trusted users can push or pull images. Signed artifacts add another layer of assurance, verifying that images have not been tampered with in transit or storage. Registries must also be monitored and audited to detect suspicious activity, such as unauthorized uploads. In large organizations, registries may support multiple teams, making access governance especially important. By treating registries as critical infrastructure rather than simple storage, administrators ensure that the supply chain remains trustworthy. Without registry security, the entire container ecosystem is at risk, as compromised images can spread widely before detection. Role-based access control is the cornerstone of governance in container platforms, defining who can do what within a cluster. RBAC enforces least privilege by granting permissions tailored to specific roles, whether human users or automated services. For example, a developer may be allowed to deploy workloads but not alter network policies, while a monitoring service may only read logs. This fine-grained control reduces the impact of compromised accounts, as attackers cannot escalate privileges beyond the role's boundaries. Auditing RBAC policies provides visibility into who has access to sensitive operations and whether assignments align with security principles. Misconfigured RBAC can be as dangerous as no RBAC at all, potentially granting broad permissions to unintended users. In practice, RBAC is both a technical and cultural tool, reinforcing the principle that trust must be earned and narrowly scoped within shared platforms. Admission control represents the gatekeeper function of container platforms, enforcing policies at deployment time. Before a workload is admitted into the cluster, admission controllers check it against defined rules, blocking non-compliant images, insecure settings, or excessive privileges. For example, admission control might prevent a pod from running with root access or from using unapproved images. These checks ensure that security policies are enforced proactively rather than reactively. Without admission control, insecure workloads may enter production and require costly remediation after deployment. The flexibility of admission controllers allows organizations to codify governance as code, embedding security policies directly into the orchestration process. This transforms security from an external audit step into an integral part of workload lifecycle management, ensuring that every deployed container meets minimum security standards from the moment it enters the environment. Pod or workload security standards define the baseline rules for how containers interact with their environment. These standards cover aspects such as privilege levels, user identities, and host interactions. For example, workloads may be required to run as non-root users, limit host file system access, and specify explicit resource requests. These standards reduce the risk of privilege escalation, denial of service, or unintended interference with the host. Enforcing them consistently across a cluster ensures that workloads operate within safe boundaries, even when deployed by different teams. In regulated environments, such standards also provide evidence of compliance, demonstrating that security controls are applied uniformly. Workload security standards represent the codification of best practices into enforceable rules, translating abstract principles like least privilege into concrete, measurable policies that protect both the cluster and its tenants. Security-enhanced Linux and AppArmor introduce mandatory access controls that confine what processes inside containers can do. These frameworks add another layer of defense by restricting capabilities beyond the discretionary permissions defined by users. For example, SE Linux policies can prevent a containerized process from accessing files outside its allowed domain, even if the process is running with elevated privileges. AppArmor profiles similarly constrain system calls and file access. These controls reduce the impact of compromised workloads, ensuring that even if an attacker gains access, their ability to move laterally or tamper with the host is restricted. Mandatory access controls are sometimes perceived as complex, but when properly configured, they provide powerful containment that complements other isolation mechanisms. By layering SE Linux or AppArmor on top of namespaces and cgroups, organizations achieve a more resilient defense in-depth strategy. CComp, or Secure Computing Mode, provides another kernel-level safeguard by filtering system calls available to containers. Every process relies on system calls to interact with the kernel, but not all workloads need the full set of calls. SecComp profiles restrict access to only those required, reducing the attack surface significantly. For example, if a container does not need to load new kernel modules, that system call can be blocked entirely. By limiting system calls, CComp prevents many common exploitation techniques that rely on kernel interaction. Custom profiles allow organizations to tailor restrictions to specific workloads, balancing functionality with security. While building precise profiles can be challenging, the payoff is meaningful. Containers run within narrowly defined boundaries that attackers cannot easily escape. SecComp illustrates how fine-grained control over fundamental system operations translates directly into reduced risk. Rootless containers further enhance security by avoiding the use of the root user inside workloads. Running containers as root increases the potential damage of a compromise, as attackers may gain broad access to the host. Rootless containers operate with unprivileged user IDs, dramatically reducing what an attacker can achieve if they break isolation. For example, a compromised process running as a non-root user may still affect its container but will struggle to affect the underlying host or neighboring workloads. While not all use cases support rootless execution, adopting it wherever possible aligns with the principle of least privilege. This practice reflects a broader trend in security, assuming that compromise is possible and limiting its impact. Rootless containers transform a high-risk default into a safer operating model, protecting clusters against one of the most common misconfigurations in container deployments. The Container Network Interface defines how container networking is implemented, allowing plugins to provide segmentation, routing, and policy enforcement. CNI plugins are responsible for connecting pods to each other and to external networks. Security considerations include ensuring proper segmentation between workloads, limiting exposure to unnecessary networks, and integrating with broader network policies. Misconfigured CNI components can create vulnerabilities such as open traffic paths or unauthorized cross-namespace communication. Properly configured, they provide both flexibility and control, enabling fine-grained traffic governance. The choice of CNI plugin also matters, as some provide advanced features like encryption or network policy enforcement by default. By treating CNI configuration as a security decision rather than a purely operational one, Organizations ensure that networking supports both performance and isolation, reducing the risk of unintended lateral movement within clusters. Network policies operate at the workload level, defining which pods are allowed to communicate with one another. Without them, container platforms often default to permissive communication, allowing any pod to talk to any other. Network policies introduce a least privilege model for traffic, restricting flows to only what is necessary for business logic. For example, an application front-end may be allowed to communicate with a database, but not directly with another unrelated service. These policies significantly reduce lateral movement opportunities for attackers who compromise one workload. Enforcing network policies requires both orchestration support and thoughtful design, ensuring that legitimate traffic is not disrupted while unnecessary paths are blocked. When implemented systematically, network policies transform the internal network from an open playground into a controlled environment, where communication is purposeful, documented, and secure. Secrets management in container environments addresses one of the most persistent challenges in modern security: protecting credentials and keys. Containers often need access to sensitive information, such as database passwords or API tokens, but embedding these secrets in images or code creates long-lived vulnerabilities. Secure secrets management injects credentials at runtime, stores them encrypted at rest, and enforces strict access auditing. Short-lived tokens reduce exposure, and centralized systems ensure consistent handling across workloads. For example, Kubernetes can integrate with external vaults to provide on-demand secrets to pods, rotating them automatically. By treating secrets as dynamic assets rather than static artifacts, organizations reduce the chance of accidental leaks and limit the damage if secrets are compromised. Secrets management reflects the principle that credentials deserve the same rigor as code, requiring governance, monitoring, and lifecycle controls to maintain trust. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Supply chain controls are vital in container ecosystems, where images move rapidly from development pipelines to production clusters. Verifying image provenance with signature validation ensures that artifacts originate from trusted sources and have not been tampered with in transit. Allow lists restrict deployments to approved images, blocking unverified or potentially malicious components. The Software Bill of Materials, or SBOM, provides transparency into what each image contains, including libraries and dependencies, so that organizations can quickly assess exposure when new vulnerabilities emerge. Together, these measures transform supply chains from opaque pipelines into auditable, trustworthy processes. Without them, organizations risk unknowingly deploying compromised workloads that inherit hidden weaknesses. Supply chain controls are not simply compliance requirements. They are defensive mechanisms that address the reality that threats often enter environments long before runtime, embedded invisibly in the very code and artifacts used to build applications. Vulnerability scanning plays an equally critical role by continuously assessing container images for known flaws. By integrating scanning into continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines, organizations detect vulnerabilities early, preventing them from propagating into production. Registries can also enforce scanning as part of their workflows, blocking image uploads that contain severe issues. For example, if a base image includes a critical library flaw, the scan can flag it, prompting developers to rebuild with a patched version before release. Runtime scanning complements this by monitoring deployed containers for newly disclosed vulnerabilities, ensuring coverage across the lifecycle. Automation reduces delays, while prioritization ensures that remediation focuses on the most impactful risks. Without embedded scanning, clusters can harbor vulnerable images for months, creating silent attack vectors. With it, vulnerability management becomes proactive, transforming containers from weak points into assets hardened against known threats. Configuration baselines provide consistent standards for how containers and pods are deployed, ensuring that workloads align with least privilege and resilience principles. Common requirements include enforcing read-only root file systems which prevent malicious modification of binaries during runtime. Dropping unnecessary Linux capabilities limits what processes inside containers can do, reducing the blast radius of compromise. Explicit resource limits prevent containers from consuming excessive CPU or memory, protecting cluster stability and reducing the risk of denial-of-service attacks. These baselines function as guardrails, ensuring that every workload begins from a secure posture. For example, enforcing resource limits ensures that one misbehaving service cannot starve others of critical resources. Codifying configuration baselines in policy and validating them through admission controls ensures that standards are consistently applied. In effect, baselines make security and reliability the defaults, preventing weak configurations from undermining the cluster as a whole. Volume management addresses one of the most sensitive aspects of container security: data persistence. While containers are designed to be ephemeral, many applications require persistent volumes. Managing how these volumes are mounted and secured is crucial. Host path volumes, which mount directories from the host file system, present significant risks and should be restricted, as they can expose sensitive system files or allow containers to escape isolation. Encryption of persistent data protects confidentiality, while mount options enforce controls such as read-only access where appropriate. Governance must extend through the volume lifecycle, ensuring that data is properly sanitized upon deletion. For example, if a database container uses a persistent volume, the volume should be encrypted, access tightly scoped, and securely wiped when no longer needed. By treating volumes as first-class security concerns, organizations ensure that the advantages of persistence do not come at the expense of integrity or compliance. Service accounts and tokens enable containers to authenticate with orchestrators and services, but if left unchecked, they can become serious liabilities. Tokens should follow least privilege principles, granting only the permissions necessary for specific tasks. They should also have short lifetimes and be rotated regularly to minimize exposure. For instance, a service account used by a monitoring pod might only require read access to metrics, not write access to configuration. Automation ensures that tokens are provisioned securely, rotated on schedule, and revoked when no longer needed. Auditing access provides visibility into how tokens are used, deterring abuse. Without governance, long-lived, overly permissive tokens become an attacker's dream, offering persistent access even if workloads are compromised. By embedding rotation, auditing, and least privilege into service account design, organizations reduce risk while maintaining the flexibility that containerized platforms demand. Ingress control defines how external users and systems reach workloads inside a container platform. Gateways act as controlled entry points, applying policies, authentication, and monitoring before traffic is routed internally. Web application firewalls add another layer, filtering malicious input such as SQL injection attempts or cross-site scripting. By centralizing ingress through managed gateways, organizations avoid exposing workloads directly to the internet, where they may be unprepared for hostile traffic. For example, an ingress controller can enforce TLS, terminate connections, and apply rate limits before requests reach services. WAF integration extends this by inspecting payloads for threats. Together, gateways and WAFs transform ingress from a vulnerability into a fortified channel, ensuring that external interactions are both controlled and monitored. Without such defenses, attackers can probe workloads directly, bypassing policy and oversight. With them, ingress becomes a hardened and accountable interface between clusters and the outside world. Egress control complements ingress by restricting where workloads can send outbound traffic. Without restrictions, compromised containers can exfiltrate data to attacker-controlled systems or communicate with unauthorized destinations. Egress policies enforce least privilege for network communication, limiting containers to known, necessary endpoints. For example, a back-end service may only need to connect to a database and a payment processor, Blocking all other outbound destinations reduces exposure. These controls also help detect anomalies, as attempts to connect to unapproved destinations may indicate compromise. While egress control requires careful tuning to avoid disrupting legitimate operations, it is essential for preventing silent data leaks and lateral communication with malicious infrastructure. In combination with ingress governance, egress policies ensure that containers interact with the outside world only in safe, expected, and auditable ways. Runtime detection extends defenses into the operational phase, identifying suspicious behavior as workloads execute. Techniques include analyzing kernel telemetry and deploying extended Berkeley packet filter, or eBPF sensors, to observe system calls and network activity in real time. These tools can detect stealthy techniques such as privilege escalation attempts, unusual file access, or crypto mining behavior. Because detection occurs at runtime, it provides coverage against both known and emerging threats, including zero-day exploits that bypass static checks. For example, a container unexpectedly opening outbound connections to unknown domains could trigger alerts. Runtime detection requires integration with incident response workflows, ensuring that anomalies lead to timely investigation. While false positives are possible, the value lies in closing the visibility gap, ensuring that active threats cannot persist undetected. By monitoring live behavior, organizations turn runtime into an opportunity for defense rather than a blind spot. Node isolation ensures that even if a container is compromised, its ability to affect the host or other workloads is limited. This involves disabling unnecessary kernel modules, restricting device access, and hardening host operating systems against exploitation. For example, containers should not have access to raw device files unless explicitly required. Isolating workloads by namespace, cgroup, and security module policies reinforces the principle of least privilege. In environments with especially sensitive data, dedicated nodes may be used to separate trusted from untrusted workloads, reducing the blast radius of compromise. Node isolation is not about preventing every possible attack but about ensuring that compromises remain contained. By reducing the avenues through which containers can escape, organizations preserve the integrity of the broader platform and maintain confidence in multi-tenant operations. Multi-tenancy segmentation addresses the challenges of running workloads from different teams, customers, or business units within the same infrastructure. Segmentation can be achieved through namespaces, clusters, or even separate accounts, depending on the level of isolation required. For high trust boundaries, full cluster separation may be appropriate, while namespaces may suffice for lower trust divisions. Segmentation prevents one tenant's misconfigurations or compromises from affecting others, limiting risk exposure. For example, a vulnerability in one team's application should not allow access to another team's secrets or workloads. Governance ensures that policies, quotas, and monitoring are consistently applied across segments. In cloud-native contexts, segmentation reflects the reality that not all workloads share the same risk profile. By tailoring isolation to context, organizations create flexible but secure platforms that support collaboration without sacrificing safety. Backup and restore procedures extend security into resilience, ensuring that registries, manifests, configurations, and persistent volumes can be recovered after failures or attacks. Backups must include not only application data, but also cluster state information such as etcd databases in Kubernetes. Without these, recovery may restore workloads but not the orchestration logic that governs them. Encryption protects backup confidentiality, while testing validates that restores function under pressure. For example, a cluster compromised by ransomware can only be rebuilt confidently if secure backups of images, manifests, and persistent volumes exist. Backup procedures should be documented, automated, and aligned with compliance requirements. By treating backups as part of security rather than just operations, organizations create a safeguard against both accidental failures and deliberate sabotage, ensuring continuity even in hostile conditions. Upgrade strategies recognize that container platforms evolve rapidly, with frequent updates to orchestrators, runtimes, and supporting components. Staging upgrades in controlled environments allows compatibility to be tested before production rollout. Rolling updates and canary deployments provide further safeguards, minimizing disruption if problems arise. Rollback plans ensure that issues discovered after release can be reversed quickly. For example, a new Kubernetes version might be tested on a staging cluster before being introduced into production, with automated rollback triggered if critical services fail. Upgrades must be seen not only as operational necessities but as security imperatives, as outdated orchestrators or runtimes may contain exploitable flaws. By embedding discipline into upgrades, organizations maintain both innovation and trust, ensuring that clusters remain secure and functional as the ecosystem evolves. Audit logging provides the transparency needed to investigate incidents and enforce accountability in container environments. Logs should capture administrative actions, workload changes, and significant security events. For example, creating or deleting pods, modifying RBAC roles, or altering network policies should all generate auditable records. Centralizing and protecting logs ensures they cannot be tampered with, while retention policies align with legal and regulatory obligations. During investigations, audit logs serve as the authoritative record of what occurred, when, and by whom. Without them, administrators are left guessing, and compliance evidence is absent. With them, organizations can demonstrate diligence, trace attacks, and enforce governance. Logging thus transforms ephemeral workloads into accountable actors, ensuring that actions in fast-moving container platforms remain visible and verifiable. Evidence generation formalizes the process of producing documentation that demonstrates security and compliance. This may include policy manifests, vulnerability scan results, runtime detection findings, and attestations of image provenance. Evidence is not only for external auditors but also for internal assurance, enabling leadership to confirm that controls are functioning as intended. For example, presenting scan results alongside deployment manifests provides proof that only compliant workloads entered production. Automating evidence generation through pipelines reduces manual effort and ensures consistency. This practice reflects a broader shift in cybersecurity. Proving that defenses are active is as important as implementing them. Evidence generation bridges that gap, translating technical controls into verifiable artifacts that withstand scrutiny from both auditors and adversaries. For exam purposes, container platform security emphasizes orchestrator governance, image integrity, and runtime hardening aligned to least privilege. Candidates may be asked to identify appropriate policies for securing control planes, recognize how admission control enforces compliance, or evaluate practices like rootless containers and SecOps profiles. Understanding the full lifecycle from building and scanning images, to enforcing workload policies, to monitoring runtime behavior demonstrates readiness. The exam does not simply test knowledge of tools but assesses comprehension of principles, ensuring that container platforms are both secure and auditable. For learners, the key takeaway is that container security requires layered defenses, addressing supply chains, orchestrators, nodes, and workloads simultaneously to deliver resilient, compliant platforms. In conclusion, container platform security depends on orchestrator controls, hardened nodes, verified images, and runtime policies working together. Orchestrators provide powerful automation but must be governed with strict access and auditing. Nodes serve as the foundation and require minimal, patched builds. Images define workloads and must be trustworthy, scanned, and signed. Runtime controls enforce least privilege and detect anomalies, while segmentation, upgrades, and evidence generation ensure resilience and accountability. By adopting this layered model, organizations transform fast-moving container ecosystems into secure, auditable environments capable of withstanding both operational challenges and active threats. For professionals, mastering these practices means enabling the agility of containers without sacrificing the trust that modern platforms demand. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.